They say silence is golden. But that night, my silence was fire. That's how my family drama began, the night my husband looked me in the eye and decided to destroy me. He didn't raise his hand. He raised his voice. And sometimes, that hurts more. I'm not going to support a lazy, overweight woman like you, Derek screamed across the dining table, his voice sharp enough to slice through my soul. He had no idea that the woman he called useless was about to become the owner of the corporation where he worked. The wine in his glass trembled as he slammed it down. You disgust me, Elena. You don't even look like a wife, you look like a burden. The words echoed in my head like gunfire inside a locked room. My mother, Margaret, sat in her wheelchair at the corner of the room, her frail fingers trembling, her silence screaming louder than both of us. And beside me, my 11-year-old son, Noah, played with his sensory toy, pretending not to hear. But he did. Children always do. The house smelled of mashed potatoes and burnt pride. The walls had seen too many nights like this, nights where I swallowed words just to keep peace where silence felt safer than truth. But something in me shifted. For 12 years, I had been his wife, his caretaker, his invisible support. That night, I became something else, a storm he could no longer predict. Then came the call that changed everything. My phone buzzed on the table, an unknown number. I almost ignored it. But destiny doesn't knock twice, Mrs. Carter, a formal voice said. This is Bennett and Associates. We're calling about the testamentary succession of Mr. Richard Halden. You've been named the sole heir of his entire estate. The room blurred. My pulse slowed, but my mind was suddenly alive. Derek was still yelling, but his voice turned into static. My mother's eyes wide and knowing whispered what her lips never could. It was true. In that single moment, humiliation became revelation. I realized that power doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives quietly, like a breath before the storm. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, "You're right, Derek. You'll never have to support me again." He thought he'd won. He had no idea he had just lit the fuse of a revenge story that would burn through every lie he'd ever told. Because the most dangerous woman is the one who stops begging to be understood and starts planning in silence. The morning after that dinner felt unreal, as if the whole house had been emptied of oxygen. The coffee maker sputtered the television, mumbled some cheerful commercial about weekend sales. And yet everything inside me was quiet, too quiet. Derek moved around the kitchen, humming, pretending nothing had happened. He poured himself coffee, glanced at me, and smiled, the kind of smile people use when they're hiding a wound or a weapon. "Rough night, huh? Maybe don't overreact next time," he said, casually scrolling through his phone. I stared at the man I'd once trusted with my life, and realized he was no longer capable of shame. That was his real betrayal, not the shouting, but the ease with which he erased it. He kissed Noah's head, patted my shoulder, and left for work at Halden Industries, the company he still believed belonged to someone else. The front door shut, and the echo rolled through the hallway like thunder after a storm that isn't done yet. My mother, Margaret, looked at me from her chair. Her eyes asked the question her mouth didn't dare. "Are you going to stay?" I didn't answer. I went upstairs, opened the closet, and pulled out a small blue suitcase. The one I used before I got married, back when I still believed promises were permanent. I folded Noah's clothes first, then mine, then Mom's medications. Each sound of a zipper felt like a heartbeat coming back to life. When the phone rang again, it wasn't the lawyer. It was Derek's co-worker accidentally calling my number instead of his. The screen lit up with the name Sophie Turner. For a moment, I froze. Sophie. I'd met her once at a company dinner. Blonde hair, quick laugh, Too much perfume. The kind of woman who compliments your earrings while stealing your reflection. I didn't pick up, but curiosity gnawed at me. When the voicemail arrived, I pressed play. Her voice, soft, breathy, familiar, said only 5 words. Call me when she's gone. The room tilted. My hand trembled, but my mind turned razor sharp. Betrayal didn't just live under my roof. It lived inside his office, inside the hours he claimed to work late. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place he'd humiliated me, and let the realization sink in. He wasn't just cruel. He was careless. Careless enough to think I would never fight back. That night when he returned, I pretended. I smiled. I served dinner. I asked about his day. The family drama around me continued like a bad reality show. Fake laughter, shallow talk, a man rehearsing his lies. He spoke about promotions, projects, and some new consultant Halden Industries was hiring. I listened quietly, memorizing every word. He had no idea the new consultant would be me. But before any revenge could begin, I needed the truth from my mother. We sat by the window while Noah slept. The streetlight painted thin bars of light across her face. "Mom," I said softly, "how do you know Richard Halden?" She looked away. For years, she carried that secret like a brick in her chest. "He was your father," she whispered. "He wanted me to get rid of you." I didn't. He fired me. I thought I'd buried that part of my life. The confession hit harder than any slap. My bloodline, the same empire Derek worshipped, was mine by birth. He married the woman who secretly owned his destiny. When dawn came, I dressed in jeans, no makeup, hair tied back. Derek still snored in the bedroom, a half-empty wine bottle on his nightstand. I placed the wedding ring on the dresser. It looked like a coin I was done spending. I carried Noah downstairs. He clung to his blanket, but didn't cry. Margaret waited by the door, wrapped in a shawl. The rideshare car pulled up, blue sedan driver yawning. As the door closed, I looked back one last time. The house stood there like a photograph, still fake, overexposed. "He thinks he owns me," I whispered, but he just sold himself. For weeks afterward, Derek's messages came in waves, angry, pleading, manipulative. He texted, "You can't survive without me," and I almost laughed. Meanwhile, Bennett and Associates confirmed every detail of the inheritance. Documents arrived, deeds, stocks, trust funds, all signed by Richard Halden. I wasn't just his daughter. I was his successor. One afternoon, curiosity dragged me onto Derek's social media page. Every photo looked like propaganda, smiling couple selfies, captions about love, loyalty, and faith. The comments overflowed with hearts. The world saw a perfect marriage. That was our greatest illusion, the family that looked complete, while quietly decaying from the inside. I printed one of those photos and pinned it to my new apartment wall. It wasn't nostalgia, it was evidence. Evidence of who I used to be and who I refused to remain. Every betrayal carries a gift wrapped in pain. Mine was clarity. I finally saw that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I was finally indifferent to him. He still didn't know what I'd become. The promotion he bragged about, it depended on a signature from the board of directors, my signature. As I prepared to walk into Halden Industries under a new identity, I thought about the voicemail, the insult, the night of humiliation. All of it condensed into a single promise, pulsing in my chest. I won't scream. I won't cry. I'll dismantle you piece by piece, silently. Because in this revenge story, silence isn't weakness. Silence is strategy. People think betrayal ends when you walk away. They don't understand that sometimes the worst part of a family drama is what happens after the polite texts, the fake smiles, the careful lies that dress themselves as love. For weeks after I left, Derek called every morning using the same soft voice he once saved for clients. "Noah needs a stable home, Elena. We can talk, right?" His words were honey over venom. I never answered, but I listened to learn the rhythm of his manipulation. He wanted to rewrite the story, to turn the abuser into the hero, and me into the hysterical wife who overreacted. Then came the postcards. Photos of the house he'd refused to maintain, suddenly blooming with new flowers, captions written in his handwriting, "The roses miss you," as if paint and petals could cover 12 years of disrespect. Mom shook her head when she saw them. "He's not missing you, darling," she said, her voice low. "He's missing control." One Sunday, Noah asked to see his father. My heart clenched. I didn't want Derek's poison near him, but I couldn't cage my son's innocence. So we met at a small cafe downtown, a place with glass windows and witnesses. Derek arrived wearing a crisp navy suit, the corporate armor of guilt. He brought a toy truck for Noah, hugged him too tightly, and looked at me with those rehearsed puppy eyes. "You look good," he said. "Independence suits you." He spoke about therapy, reflection, how he wasn't himself that night. Classic performance remorse without responsibility. The whole scene felt like theater, a man playing the part of a husband, a father, a victim, anything but the villain. Noah smiled, sipping his chocolate milk, unaware that his parents were actors trapped in the same tragedy. And me, I played my role too. I smiled, I nodded, I let him think the illusion still worked. Because sometimes, to expose a liar, you let him believe his lie. When we left, Mom said he's pretending to love, so you'll stop fighting. Don't. I promised I wouldn't. But at night, when Noah slept, I scrolled through old family photos, the three of us at Christmas. Matching pajamas, wide grins. The images looked warm, but all I could remember was the chill in the room after the camera clicked. For years, I whispered to myself I fed a monster with kindness. I'd served dinners with shaking hands, whispered apologies I didn't owe, and accepted silence as peace. The truth was simpler. We were never a family. We were a performance. The illusion stretched further than I thought. At Halden Industries, Derek paraded our last name like a brand of loyalty. He told colleagues how devoted his wife was, how we built everything together. I learned this from Daniel Brooks, my old friend, who quietly sent me internal memos and photos from company events. There was Derek smiling beside Sophie Turner, his assistant hand on her back, like a signature. Daniel wrote only one line beneath the image, "He's still lying." But now to everyone. Something inside me hardened, but it wasn't hate. It was focus. I began gathering the fragments of my old life, studying them the way archaeologists study ruins. Bank statements, texts, receipts, every proof of his hypocrisy. At first, I thought I wanted revenge. Then I realized what I really wanted was truth displayed in daylight. Meanwhile, Noah still asked why Daddy wasn't coming home. I told him the truth scaled to the size of his heart, because sometimes love turns into something that hurts. He nodded and hugged me small arms that felt like forgiveness. One evening as the sun melted over Riverside City, Mom and I sat by the window, watching people on the street, couples laughing, children running ordinary life. She whispered, "You can't build peace on pretending, Elena." I tried. "It breaks you slower, but it breaks you." Her words struck deeper than any sermon. That night, I deleted every old photo, every message, every illusion that kept me tethered. The family that looked perfect on social media died quietly at 11:47 p.m., the moment I pressed erase. But fate has a sense of irony. The next morning, I received an invitation from Halden Industries for a family employee luncheon. Derek had included my name on the guest list, calling me Mrs. Lawson partner and supporter. I laughed so hard, I cried. He still believed I existed to decorate his reputation. I went. I wore black, simple, sharp, the color of endings. When I entered the hall, the crowd hushed for half a second. Derek's face drained of color, then quickly reassembled into a smile. "Elena, you made it!" he exclaimed, kissing the air near my cheek. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered about reconciliation. For the next hour, we danced around questions, compliments, memories. It was a masquerade of civility. But beneath the tablecloth, my phone recorded everything, every word, every falsity, every slip that would later become evidence. By dessert, Derek raised his glass. "To my wife," he announced. "The heart of this family drama, who taught me forgiveness." People applauded. He had no idea that the woman sitting across from him was already building the case that would dismantle his career. When it was over, I shook his hand and whispered, "Thank you for the show." That night, driving home, I felt lighter. Not free yet, but close. The facade had cracked in public, and soon everyone would see what I saw: a man who mistook control for love and a woman who turned silence into power. Because sometimes the most dangerous revenge doesn't scream or strike. It smiles for the camera and waits. Sometimes when the house falls silent after midnight, the ghosts of my old life crawl back in. They don't haunt me with screams, they whisper. They whisper the things I once believed were love. I remember the early years with Derek before the betrayal, when everything still looked like a revenge story waiting for a hero. We met at a 4th of July party, downtown fireworks, in the sky, promises in our eyes. He said he loved my ambition, my calm, the way I looked at people without judgment. What he really loved was the idea of molding that calm into submission. He didn't marry a woman. He married a reflection he could edit. Back then, I worked 2 jobs and still made dinner every night. I ironed his shirts at 2 a.m., dreaming about vacations we'd never take. Every time he said, "You're lucky to have me," I believed him. That's what emotional captivity feels like. It doesn't scream, it convinces. When I think about those years, it's not anger I feel. It's exhaustion. The kind that sits deep in your bones, the kind that silence cannot cure. Because when you spend years apologizing for your own light, you start to believe you deserve the dark. There were moments I thought of leaving. Once I even packed Noah's baby clothes and a photo of Mom when she was young, smiling free, her hands still steady. But I unpacked them again after Derek came home with flowers and promises. I told myself he was changing. He wasn't. He was recalibrating control. My therapist, Dr. Lena Brooks, once told me, "Elena, trauma is a loop. It repeats until you change the music." That sentence became a prayer. Every night I replayed our fights, not to punish myself, but to study them. To understand how fear works, how shame moves, how love can be weaponized. The memory that hurts most isn't a slap or a shout. It's the time Derek came home from work, dropped his briefcase, and said I got the promotion. "You should smile more. It reflects better on me." That was the moment I realized he didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as part of the furniture, polished quiet, necessary for appearance. I used to think silence made me weak. But in that quiet, I was learning, observing. Every insult was a lesson in power. Every dismissal, a note in the manual of self-respect. When I close my eyes now, I can still see the version of me sitting at that kitchen table, afraid to speak. I wish I could reach through time and whisper, "You're not crazy for wanting peace. You're brave for wanting more." Sometimes I wonder what my mother saw in me all those years. She'd been through her own wars, poverty, abandonment, illness. When she told me Richard Halden was my real father, I didn't just hear a secret. I heard the echo of every woman who was told to stay quiet for survival. but I'm not her. I love her strength, but I won't inherit her silence. After the luncheon at Halden Industries, I sat on my balcony looking over Riverside City. The lights below looked like the stars we used to draw as kids, perfect, unreachable. I thought of my father, of the empire he built on money and guilt. I thought of Derek trying to build his own empire on lies. And then I thought of myself, the woman between them, carving a new kind of legacy, not built on inheritance or deception, but on awareness. That's when I began writing everything down. I filled notebook after notebook with dates, memories, confessions, a testimony of survival disguised as reflection. The act of writing felt like cleaning a wound. It stung, but it healed. There's one page I return to often. It's dated 2 years before I left. He said I should lose weight. I wrote, but I'm already disappearing. I stared at those words for hours, realizing how easily women shrink themselves to fit the smallness of someone else's comfort. Never again. Noah once asked me, "Mom, why do you stare at the sky so much?" I told him, "Because the sky never apologizes for being vast." He didn't understand, but he smiled. Someday, he will. I replayed every memory until they lost their power. Each recollection became a clue, a breadcrumb leading me out of the labyrinth of shame. Even the good moments turned thin, brittle, exposed for what they were: temporary distractions from truth. I learned that healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering differently. I can still recall the smell of his cologne, the sound of his shoes on the hardwood floor, the taste of fear before every argument. But now, those details don't own me. I own them. People often ask how survivors of betrayal regain trust. The truth is, you don't start by trusting others. You start by trusting your instincts again. The same instincts you were taught to doubt. The same voice that said, "Leave long before you listened." That voice saved me. Now when I stand in front of the mirror, I don't see the woman who endured. I see the woman who observed, calculated, evolved. The silent power I once feared has become my armor. I am not what happened to me. I am what I decided to become after it did. And that realization, that calm fire, was the moment the old Elena finally died, and the new one began to build something indestructible, a piece that no man, no betrayal, and no memory could ever steal again. They say knowledge is power, but in a revenge story, timing is everything. I had the knowledge, I just needed the perfect moment to use it. After months of pretending to heal, I was finally ready to move from reflection to precision. Silence had taught me patience. Now it was time to weaponize it. Every morning, I dropped Noah at therapy, kissed his forehead, and drove downtown. To anyone watching, I looked like another single mom rebuilding her life. What they didn't know was that behind my sunglasses, I was memorizing every entrance, every face, every schedule at Halden Industries, the company my late father built and my husband exploited. I walked into the glass building one Tuesday morning carrying a resume under the name E.C. Halden Consulting, LLC. No one questioned it. The Halden name still opened doors even when no one understood why it sounded familiar. I'd done my research. The board had been searching for a temporary external consultant to audit vendor contracts. Perfect. The HR manager, a nervous man with thin hair, smiled too much. "So, Miss Halden, you've done financial audits before, for families that preferred their secrets buried," I replied, smiling. By noon, I was inside the system, an email address, a badge, a cubicle, overlooking the same parking lot where Derek liked to brag about his promotion. He didn't recognize me at first. The black glasses and clipped hair were enough disguise. He walked past me twice that day, talking loudly about budgets and operational transparency. transparency. The irony almost made me laugh. That afternoon, I found the first crack. A vendor called Silverline Projects. Huge invoices, minimal documentation. Payments approved by Derek himself. I downloaded every file, cross-checked bank transfers, and saw the pattern. Immediately, money rerouted through shell accounts, landing in a joint investment fund under his name and Sophie Turner's. He was stealing from my father's empire to fund his mistress. I sat there staring at the screen until my hands stopped shaking. Then I hit print 132 pages of proof. I tucked them into a folder labeled Vacation Reports. That night, I met Daniel Brooks at a quiet diner outside Riverside City. He looked older gilt, sitting heavy behind his eyes. I knew something was off, he said. I just didn't know how deep it went. It's not about deep, I told him. It's about deliberate. We formed a plan. Daniel would help me access archived internal emails. I would follow the financial trails through every department Derek touched. To protect him, I insisted he use an anonymous relay. No digital footprints. Revenge isn't rage, it's chess. Over the next 6 weeks, I lived 2 lives. At home, I was the quiet mother making pancakes and attending Noah's school recitals. At work, I was a ghost moving through spreadsheets and lies. My silence became my camouflage. Derek bragged openly about promotions, lunches with executives, even joked that the new consultant had nice handwriting. He didn't know that consultant was preparing his execution file. Sometimes between spreadsheets, I'd catch my reflection in the monitor, steady eyes, calm face. I realized I no longer hated him. Hatred ties you to the person who hurt you. I wanted distance, not destruction. What I sought was something colder, cleaner justice. Late one night, Daniel sent me an encrypted folder. Inside were dozens of emails, Derek instructing Sophie to inflate invoices, falsify progress reports, and wire kickbacks to offshore accounts. The timestamps matched company payment cycles perfectly. It wasn't sloppy greed, it was systematic theft. Still, I needed confirmation. That's when Owen Miller, a data analyst, barely 24, stumbled into my orbit. I'd seen him once eating lunch alone with headphones on eyes, darting across numbers on his screen. When I approached him, he flinched. "I'm not supposed to talk to contractors," he whispered. "You're not," I agreed. "But you're also not supposed to watch the system being drained?" Owen hesitated, then nodded. Over the next few nights, we met in the copy room after hours. He showed me patterns the accountants missed, minor rounding errors that, when traced, revealed millions disappearing quietly. His precision was almost poetic. When we were done, I placed the evidence into a sealed envelope, labeled simply Truth. My plan crystallized the next shareholders' assembly broadcast. Live for Compliance Transparency would become the stage. Derek would present his quarterly report, blissfully unaware that his own voice and files would play behind him on the big screen. But revenge doesn't thrive on adrenaline. It thrives on restraint. I rehearsed every expression, every tone, every pause. I practiced how to breathe when power finally returned to my hands. One evening, while reviewing documents, Mom called from the living room. "Be careful, Elena," she said. "Even justice has consequences." I smiled. So does silence. The night before the meeting, I sat beside Noah as he slept, his hand clutching my finger. He murmured something about superheroes saving the day. I wanted to tell him his mother was about to do exactly that. But heroes rarely look like what children imagine. When dawn broke, I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit the same shade as resolve. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "You've already won. Tomorrow is just the announcement." And as I walked out the door with that envelope in my bag, I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming authorship of my own story. rewriting it with silent power, precision, and grace. Because when a woman stops waiting for apology and starts planning with clarity, the world calls it vengeance. But I call it freedom. The morning of the shareholders' meeting felt unreal too, still too clean, the kind of calm that comes before a thunderstorm. The glass towers of Halden Industries shimmered under the Virginia sun, proud and fragile at the same time. I arrived early, blending in with the crowd of executives and assistants, carrying tablets, coffee cups, and secrets. No one looked at me twice. That's the beauty of invisibility. It lets you prepare the revolution in silence. Inside the auditorium, the air smelled of perfume, ambition, and fear. The walls glowed with the company logo, Halden Industries, integrity through innovation. I almost laughed. Integrity. The word itself was about to implode. Derek was at the podium, rehearsing his lines with Sophie, hovering behind him, whispering corrections like a stage director. He looked sharp, custom suit, silver tie, clipped the same confident smirk he wore the night he betrayed me. He didn't see me sitting 3 rows back, calm, poised, unshakable. My folder rested on my lap, the truth sleeping inside. When the meeting began, the board chair, a gray-haired man named Thomas Gray, introduced the agenda: quarterly performance projections, public image. Then Derek's turn. He stepped up to the microphone, adjusted his tie, and began his carefully scripted performance. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "I'm proud to share another record-breaking quarter for Halden Industries. Our commitment to transparency and family values remains the foundation of our success." Family values. That phrase cut through me like cold steel. I pressed the small remote in my hand, hidden under the folder. The auditorium screen flickered once, twice, and then switched. His PowerPoint vanished, replaced by a folder titled Halden Financial Integrity, Internal Audit. The crowd murmured. Derek froze. "What's happening?" he whispered to Sophie, his smile twitching. The first slide appeared, a spreadsheet of vendor payments with his digital signature. The room went silent except for the hum of the projector. Line after line revealed forged invoices, transfers to offshore accounts, and correspondence between him and Sophie. And then audio. His own voice recorded from the dinner months earlier. "If we move the funds through Silverline, no one will notice. Elena won't say a word. She's good at keeping quiet." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophie's face drained of color. Derek lunged toward the podium, slamming the laptop closed. "This is sabotage," he shouted. "Someone's trying to destroy me." But the system was locked. The video feed kept playing. His emails, his late-night messages, his mocking jokes about loyalty, all projected on a 12-foot screen in front of the board, investors, and press. I stood up slowly, my heart beat, steady, my voice clear. "No one is destroying you, Derek," I said. "You did that yourself." Every head turned. The cameras swung toward me. He stared, recognition dawning too late. "Elena," he stammered. "What are you doing here? Telling the truth?" I walked toward the stage, every step echoing through the silence. The board chair signaled security, but I raised a hand. "It's fine. I have nothing to hide." I placed the folder on the table beside the microphone. Inside is every document you'll need for a full federal audit. Wire transfers, bank logs, falsified contracts, all approved by your Vice President of Operations, Mr. Derek Lawson. Gasps again. Sophie covered her face. Derek's hands trembled, then curled into fists. "You're insane," he hissed. "You forged this. I cut him off. I didn't forge anything, but you did. For years." The board members exchanged glances. One of them, a woman from compliance, already had her phone out cross-checking numbers. Another whispered, "She's right." "These are real." Derek's voice rose desperate now. You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone? You're doing this for revenge. I met his eyes unblinking. No, Derek. This isn't revenge. This is justice. And justice doesn't ask for permission. He lunged toward me, but 2 security guards intercepted him. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. The CEO rushed to the stage demanding order, but the chaos had already erupted. In the corner of the screen, a live feed appeared federal agents entering the building lobby. Daniel had sent the files to the authorities 15 minutes before the meeting started. Derek's knees buckled as the agents approached. His voice cracked. Elena, please think about Noah. I am thinking about him, I said. That's why this ends today. They handcuffed him quietly, reading him his rights as cameras clicked like fireworks. Sophie collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands. The board chair cleared his throat, face pale. Mrs. Carter, he said, we'll need a statement. I nodded. You'll have it, along with every detail he thought I'd never find. As Derek was escorted out, he turned back one last time. His eyes were a storm rage, disbelief, shame. I didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, I felt taller than the man who used to tower over me. The silence after the door closed was electric. Everyone stared, waiting for me to collapse, to weep, to break. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and said, "Meeting adjourned." I walked out of that building into the sunlight. Reporters calling my name, microphones chasing my steps. But I didn't stop. I didn't need validation or applause. My silence had spoken louder than any speech ever could. Outside, Daniel waited by the curb. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His smile said everything, the kind of quiet pride that comes from watching someone reclaim their crown. As I slid into the passenger seat, I looked back at the tower of glass where my old life had shattered. It no longer looked powerful. It looked hollow. And I realized something profound. The truth doesn't just destroy liars. It frees the honest. That day, I didn't just expose a fraud. I buried a ghost. The world has a strange way of applauding you after it tried to silence you. By the time the headlines hit, Halden Industries executive arrested for fraud and embezzlement, my phone was already exploding with calls I didn't answer. Former colleagues, old acquaintances, even journalists pretending to care about my side of the family drama. I ignored them all. My story wasn't for entertainment. It was survival, written in real time. Derek's arrest spread across every major outlet. The footage of him being escorted out in handcuffs replayed for days, paired with my photo, the woman who had exposed him. Reporters called me the silent wife who spoke through evidence. Some called it a revenge story. Others called it justice delayed but not denied. I didn't care for labels. What mattered was that truth had finally spoken, and it had spoken through me. Halden Industries went into crisis mode. Sophie resigned within 48 hours. The board suspended half the accounting department and launched an internal ethics reform task force. My father's name, long buried under corporate deceit, was suddenly everywhere again. Richard Halden, visionary founder, betrayed by his successor. I visited his grave that week, a quiet afternoon under a gray sky. I did what you couldn't, I whispered. I protected your legacy. Back home, the silence was different now. Not heavy, not haunted, just calm. Mom was sitting by the kitchen window reading the newspaper. She didn't say I told you so. She just handed me a cup of tea the same way she used to when I was a little girl after a nightmare. You didn't destroy him, Elena, she said softly. You released yourself. Still, the days that followed weren't easy. Noah asked questions no mother wants to answer. Is Daddy in trouble? He whispered one night. I nodded. He made mistakes, sweetheart. Big ones. His lip quivered. Is he bad? I thought for a long moment. He's broken, I said, and people who don't heal their pain end up hurting others. He looked down, processing more than a child should have to. But then he hugged me tight and forgiving, as if he understood everything that mattered. The community's reaction was mixed. Some people celebrated my courage. Others whispered about humiliation and airing dirty laundry. But shame only works when you accept it. And I had outgrown that language. I didn't expose my husband. I exposed the system that enabled him. Derek's trial began 3 months later. I sat in the courtroom calm as winter while the prosecution played his own emails aloud. He refused to look at me. His lawyer painted him as a man under pressure, claiming he succumbed to stress. But the jury saw the truth. They always do when a liar forgets his own lines. After 5 days, the verdict came guilty on all charges. 8 years in federal prison. When the judge asked if I had a statement, I stood and said I don't wish him harm. I just wish he'd never mistaken love for ownership. The courtroom fell silent. Even Derek's lawyer bowed his head. He didn't fight the sentence. He just stared at the table, defeated, smaller than he'd ever seemed. I walked out into the sunlight, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. But freedom isn't the end. It's the rebuilding that tests you. The weeks after the verdict, I focused on repairing what really mattered myself. I took therapy seriously. I reconnected with friends I had pushed away. I started running again every morning, letting the rhythm of my footsteps drown out the old noise in my head. Every drop of sweat felt like a word I'd never gotten to say. Then came the calls I didn't expect. The Riverside Women's Network invited me to speak about financial abuse and emotional manipulation. At first, I hesitated. I didn't see myself as an activist, just a survivor. But when I stepped on that stage and saw the faces of women who had lived the same silent wars, I knew this was the next chapter. I told them my truth without shame, that betrayal doesn't define you, it refines you. That silence is not surrender when it's strategic. That you can turn pain into blueprint, not prison. The applause that followed wasn't for my story. It was for every woman who finally recognized herself in it. Months passed. My consulting business grew faster than I imagined. Journalists called me the woman who turned grief into governance. I smiled at that. Not because I wanted fame, but because I knew it meant my father's name was safe again. One night, after a long day, I found an envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a letter, handwritten, shaky. Derek. He'd been transferred to a federal facility upstate. The letter said, "I think about you and Noah every day. I see now what I became. I hope someday you'll tell him I loved him, even if I didn't know how." I didn't reply. Forgiveness isn't denial. It's the decision not to reopen a wound that's already scarred. I burned the letter and watched the ashes drift into the night air. That was the real closure, the moment I realized I didn't need his remorse to be whole. Now, when people ask if I regret exposing him, I tell them this truth doesn't ruin lives. Lies do. I rebuilt mine from scratch, brick by brick, boundary by boundary. The house that once echoed with tension now smells of coffee and laughter. Noah paints on the living room floor, while Mom hums old jazz tunes. And sometimes, when I sit by the window with my tea, I think about that phrase, "I once hated family drama." I used to think it meant chaos. Now I know it means evolution, because every scar in our story led us here to peace, to strength, to freedom. Derek lost everything, but I found myself. And in the quiet that followed, I discovered that the most powerful kind of revenge is peace you don't have to explain. They say forgiveness is freedom, but no one ever says it doesn't always need an audience. Mine came quietly, not through words, but through understanding. Sometimes peace isn't found in reunion. It's found in release. Months after Derek's sentencing, the noise faded. The world moved on to fresher scandals, louder betrayals, newer hashtags. My story had done its circuit through headlines and documentaries, leaving behind a trail of analysis and applause I never asked for. But I wasn't chasing closure for the cameras. I was chasing it for Noah and for the woman I used to be. We had built a new rhythm school. Mornings filled with cereal and music evenings with laughter that didn't sound rehearsed. There were no raised voices, no footsteps to dread. Just quiet, simple life. But grief is sneaky. It doesn't vanish when justice arrives. It lingers like an echo asking questions long after the answers stop mattering. One afternoon, while sorting papers for a new client, I found an old photo wedged between files, Derek, Noah, and me at the county fair. Our smiles were perfect. Our eyes were exhausted. I stared at it longer than I expected, feeling a strange calm. For years, that picture had made me angry. Now, it only made me grateful to finally understand the difference between what looked right and what felt right. That night, I lit a candle and wrote in my journal, "Forgiveness doesn't mean welcome. It means goodbye without hatred." Weeks later, the prison called. Derek had requested a visit. The officer on the phone said he's in therapy. He claims he wants to apologize in person. I thanked him and declined. But the question haunted me. Could I forgive a man who had burned the very life we built? The answer came not from logic, but from instinct. I didn't need to see him to forgive him. Still, a part of me wanted to understand. So I wrote a letter, not to him, but to myself, as if speaking to the version of me that once loved him. You were never weak for believing in him. You were hopeful. You weren't foolish for staying. You were loyal in the wrong direction. You didn't fail when the marriage fell apart. You succeeded when you finally walked away. You don't need him to say sorry for the story to end. It already did the day you chose peace. I sealed that letter, placed it in a box along with the old photos, and slid it into the back of my closet. That was my form of reconciliation. Not with him, but with my own history. Meanwhile, life continued to weave its quiet miracles. Daniel and I grew closer, not out of drama, but out of steadiness. He never tried to fix me. He simply held space for me to rebuild on my own terms. On Sundays, he'd take Noah to the park while I visited my mother. Sometimes we'd cook together, and the air smelled of cinnamon and laughter. There were no grand gestures, no cinematic declarations. Just peace that felt earned. One evening after dinner, Noah brought me a drawing. It was a house with 3 stick figures, him, me, and Daniel. Above it, he'd written in shaky crayon letters, "Home again." My eyes filled with tears. I realized he had found what I had been fighting for all along: stability, not perfection. But fate, in its strange symmetry, has a way of testing whether you truly let go. A year after the trial, I received a call from Sophie Turner. I hadn't heard her voice since the day of the arrest. She sounded fragile, the sharpness gone. "Elena," she began, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I told the truth to the investigators. I couldn't live with the lies anymore. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I whispered, 'Thank you.' It wasn't reconciliation between friends. It was recognition between survivors, 2 women who had lived in the same man's shadow and finally stepped into their own light. We didn't meet. We didn't exchange stories. But in that small, trembling word, forgiveness existed, not warm, but real. After that call, I drove to the cliffs overlooking the river. The sky burned gold as the sun sank. I thought about Derek, about Sophie, about every piece of me that had broken and learned to reshape itself. I realized forgiveness isn't a door you open for others. It's a bridge you walk across to reach yourself. That night, I dreamed of water. Calm, endless water. No waves, no storms, just stillness. When I woke, I understood the war was over, even if no one declared it. Months later, Noah and I visited a small art exhibit. On the wall was a painting of a cracked vase, mended with gold kintsugi, the Japanese art of repair. I told him the story behind it, how broken things can become more beautiful because of the cracks, not in spite of them. He smiled and said, "Like us." I nodded. Exactly like us. That was the moment I knew reconciliation had happened, not in prison, not through apology, but through legacy, through a child learning that healing is not weakness, but wisdom. When we got home, I wrote one final line in my journal. Peace doesn't mean forgetting who hurt you. It means remembering who you became afterward. And in that truth, I finally felt the full weight of silent power. The ability to forgive without forgetting to love, without losing yourself, and to move forward without needing closure from those who never deserved it. Because the most complete kind of reconciliation isn't with them, it's with yourself. And I had finally come home. People always ask me how it feels to finally win. But victory isn't what they think. It's not loud. It's not fireworks. It's quiet. It's waking up one morning and realizing the chaos doesn't live in your chest anymore. Months after everything ended, I stood by the ocean with Noah watching the tide roll in. The water was calm, steady, patient. I realized then that healing doesn't come with applause. It comes in silence, in small breaths, in the way your heart finally stops racing when you hear your own name. I thought justice would taste like revenge, sharp and satisfying. But it didn't. It tasted like peace, the kind you earn when you finally stop begging broken people to see your worth. That's what this story was never about destruction. It was about freedom. Freedom from lies, from fear, from the illusion that love has to hurt to be real. And to anyone listening who has been told they're too much too soft, or not enough, you are not broken. You are becoming. Every betrayal you've survived is proof that your heart knows how to rebuild. Every silence you've kept is not weakness, it's strategy. Every tear you've ever swallowed became part of your rebirth. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Noah asked Mom, "Are we happy?" Now I smiled. Yes, baby. Not because life is perfect, but because we are free. I want you, the one watching this right now, to remember something. The pain that once tried to bury you is now the soil where your power grows. If this story touched something inside you, if you saw even a reflection of your own scars in mine, don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. Tell me in the comments what part of this story felt like yours. Save this video so you can return to it on the days you forget how strong you really are. And if you believe in stories that remind people of their power, hit subscribe. Because every week, someone out there needs to hear what you just heard. Remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. Silence isn't surrender. And peace is the loudest revenge of all.